Hey, so this week we're starting our new unit on conversational speech, and I'm going to need the whole screen so that I can do some presentation and some other things. So you won't see the video for the like the screen image of me this week. Darn. But I wanted to walk you through basically the overview of what we're going to be doing with this unit on conversational speech, and then kind of launch you into our first week. So we have about 6 weeks of school left, and we will divide our unit based on those weeks. Um, so within the unit of conversation and colloquial speech, there are the following components. So we have turns and contributions. Basically, what that means is like, how do you dialogue? How do you have that conversation where like one person says something and then you respond, and then like, what am I supposed to contribute? What are they supposed to contribute? Now, a lot of this might seem basically standard fare for those of you who are more comfortable with just day-to-day interaction contribution in speech. But for others of us, I think conversational speech, or what people call small talk, that sort of thing, is actually difficult. And it's sort of like, well, what do I say? When do I say it? How do I say it? And so this is more of a practical unit that's going to look at it from sort of a scientific, psychological angle perspective, and help us to understand, how do we have effective conversations? So it starts with the most basic, how to have, take turns, and what do I contribute? We're going to move to the second next week, which is how to find common ground. Now, this is a little bit different than common ground, like with a debate or an argument or persuasive speech, because we're not trying to find common ground like, hey, I agree with you, you agree with me. It simply means that we're making connection. So how often do you say something and the other person's like, wait, what? I don't understand what you just said. Or like, you think you're talking about something, but they're totally missing the point and they're getting angry or frustrated or whatever it might be. Common ground simply means I've made contact. So how do you plan and monitor your conversation around your listener so that what's happening is that as you're speaking, you're taking into account their body language and their facial expression, the things they're saying back to you, and you're altering your speech to kind of match their feedback that they're giving you, to make sure that you're effectively meeting that target of communicating information. And so that's more what common ground is am I effectively targeting that audience with my message? After that, kind of the next step is looking at syntactic alignment. Now, this is a big word, syntactic. It's simply just like the way you put words and language together. So in other words, partner sensitivity, awareness, and alignment. What that means is that, are you sensitive to the person that you're speaking with? Are you aware of the person that you're speaking with? And are you aligning with their intention for the moment? So let's say you want to have a conversation with your mom or dad, and you walk into the room and you just kind of launch into what you want to say. Well, are you aware of what's going on in that situation? Are they frustrated? Are they happy? Are they distracted? Are you aware of those sort of things? Because that can impede the effectiveness of your conversation. So you want to make sure that you're aligning your pitch, your language, your tone with something that they would be willing to listen to in that context. So that will be sort of the third component, and we'll do both of those next week because they're kind of similar. Then we have fillers, and there's an entire article on spaces, pauses, that sort of thing. How do we navigate the process, basically the time lag between I'm trying to think of something and at the same time I am like, it's taking time for me to think, and there's this pause. What do I do with that pause, and how do I plan for it, and how do I organize and avoid these uhs and ums? The fifth topic is going to be repair, which is self-correction and metacognitive awareness. Inevitably, during a speech, you will put your foot in your mouth at some point, or you might say something and you're like, no, 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 I didn't mean that. And so, for instance, one of you, when you were giving your speech major project 3 last week, someone after like 1 minute said, in conclusion, and then it would have been appropriate if you caught yourself saying that to go back and say, wait, no, like I meant like this concludes my first point, and then you keep going. And so what does it look like to self-correct when you've made an error in your speech or in your conversation? How do you do that humbly? How do you do that accurately without drawing too much negative attention to the mistake that you made? Then we'll be looking at what's called sort of phonetics, listener modeling, and syntax. This has to do with word repetition, adaptive style, and form variation. So people who are very effective at public speaking tend to change the style and the approach that they use to address the person in conversation. So you might laugh at one point, or you might get very serious, or you might kind of shift your angle of approach and appearance and gesture and make it more intense or more laid back. You're going to lean toward the person and then kind of lean back from the person, depending on what you're trying to communicate and how you're trying to do that. So we're just going to do a little bit of practice with listener modeling, syntax, and phonetics. And then lastly, for the unit, we'll talk about agreement. And this has to do with the automatic, I hope that presenter thing goes away, the automatic mechanisms of language. So what that means is that we naturally do things as speakers that we're not really aware of. So we use proper like subject-verb agreement. So we would say something like, oh, yesterday when I was at the park, I saw the children on the swing. But we would say the children on the swings, and we don't even think about it. And so it's basically saying, what are the things we don't think about that we're just naturally saying, and how can we correct and perfect those to make them the most effective that we can possibly make. So that is the overview of what we'll be doing. The difficulty or the challenge with this unit is that we are going to be doing it from afar, and unfortunately it's about conversation, but we're not going to be together. And so how do we have conversation or discussion about conversation from a distance? It's going to look a little bit different. There will be just kind of accountability, because I'm going to be asking you, let's see, just for this week, we'll use this week for example. I'm going to be asking you to observe conversations around you. What do you notice about dialogue, taking turns, different contributions? And then I'm going to ask you to discuss those observations on the portal. On Flipgrid. Secondly, I'm going to ask you at one point to have a conversation with someone about something. Obviously, we can't do that in class, but you can utilize the people in your family or the people around you and try to figure out how to have those conversations. And so that's sort of like Scout's honor. You need to be doing that because you'll need to be writing about them and sharing about them on Flipgrid. So like I said, it's weird to do a distance learning unit on conversation, but we don't really have another alternative. So let's jump into the first two topics today. So turns and contributions. So for turns, we're looking at this article. It's called A Simplest Systematics for the Organization of Turn Taking for Conversation. Yes, it is. They have made it more complicated than necessary in some cases with the language, but I'm going to try to break it down for you. So here's the abstract. And then we'll get into the article. The thing that I want to start getting you comfortable with is reading and breaking down academic articles, because that is going to be a requirement moving forward, like when you go into college. So we need to look at how do we go through a dense article. The first thing is to read the abstract to try to figure out what it's talking about. And it's going to be giving you a summary of the article. So it begins, the organization of taking turns to talk is fundamental in conversation, as well as the other speech exchange systems. So basically, we all take turns when we talk. A model for turn taking is proposed and examined for its compatibility with a list of grossly observable facts about conversation. So they're basically saying we're going to be talking about a model for how to take turns in conversation. The results of the examination suggest, once we analyzed it and observed, this is what we found. These are our results. It suggests that at least a model for turn taking in conversation will be characterized as locally managed, party administered, interactionally controlled, and sensitive to recipient design. Again, really big words, but let me kind of break that down for you. Basically, when people are taking turns in conversation, these are the different components that they identify. Local management, what that means is not local as in like, local to Yakima. What it means is that the individuals in the conversation are managing what's going on in the conversation, or at least should be. Party administered, what that means is that one of the individuals usually takes lead in a conversation. And so there's going to be one party to the conversation that is kind of leading it, sort of like, hey, well, what do you think? Well, I asked the question, right? You're going to be facilitating the conversation between the other people involved. And then interactionally controlled means that if you are having a conversation, it's going to be controlled by your interaction with one another. And so, for instance, maybe the conversation gets out of control, but that means that you and the other person in the conversation aren't doing your job or your part in keeping things conversational, and instead you guys are just reactionary, or thinking more as individuals. And so there needs to be interaction between the members to control the conversation. And then again, sensitive to recipient design. In other words, are you sensing and responding to what you see each of the other individuals who are receiving the communication? Like, if you say something in an angry, aggressive manner, are you sensitive to the fact that the other person pulls back, that they withdraw, that they slump down, that their facial expression falls, or that they start to become angry as well? And so that's what it's basically saying. So several general consequences of the model are explicated, and contrasts are sketched with turn-taking organizations for other speech exchange systems. So basically, we're going to look at the consequences of these kind of speech models, and then see how other people tend to take turns. Okay, so we're going to skim through the remainder of the article together. So turn taking is used for the ordering of moves in games, for allocating political office, for regulating traffic at intersections, for serving customers at business establishments, and for talking in interviews, meetings, debates, ceremonies, conversations, etc. So turn taking is not something that obviously is unfamiliar to us. We all know about these, and these are referred to, all of these situations up here are referred to as, in this article, as speech exchange systems. So if an author does their job in an article, they're going to tell you kind of the language that they are using. And so when they say speech exchange systems, all they're talking about is how do we talk to other people in all of these contexts. And it says it's obviously a prominent type of social organization, for one whose instances are implicated in a wide range of other activities. So not only is it a speech exchange system, but they're also saying that speech and conversation is a way of social organization. So if I were taking notes, I would probably write down that conversation is a speech exchange system, and I would also probably write down that its purpose is social organization, so that we don't have everybody talking at the same time all together. In fact, conversation is a skill we have to learn. We learn it in our families of origin before school, and then we also learn it in school. You don't talk over someone, you don't interrupt, you have to take turns. We learn all of these things without realizing it. And interestingly enough, this skill is becoming something that is somewhat archaic, as families aren't talking to each other or aren't training children in the art of communication. So I would highlight those points. It continues, for socially organized activities, the presence of turns suggests an economy. So with terms for something being valued and with means for allocating them, which affect their relative distribution in its economy. So in the same way that an economy is like, money is one form of an economy. Oh, I'm running out of time. Okay, next video.